This episode is sponsored by yet another company that I truly stand behind, and that is Levels. And Levels is going to be offering you, the Behind the Shield podcast audience, a discount that I will tell you about at the end of this introduction. Now, before I even dive into what Levels does, when I had a conversation with their CEO and founder, Josh Clemente, he underlined such an important topic. So many of us rely on visits to our physicians to tell us how we are doing, and that is so backward. I am an absolute believer in putting autonomy back into the hands of the individual so they can take care of their own health. Now, what Levels does is it gives us the metrics so we can see exactly how everything is internally. So they help people improve their health through continuous glucose monitoring, comprehensive lab tests, and metabolic coaching. Now, through their 3 levels that they offer, they have programs that focus on weight loss, heart health, and glucose stability. I've now been through this program twice, and I'll kind of illustrate what it will look like. So you make an initial consultation with your Levels coach. You wear a continuous blood sugar monitor for 1 month. You'll complete a lab panel, and I did it through Quest Diagnostics. A clinician with Levels will then analyze your results and give you an action plan. That's when you can then start hitting your own health goals and in real time track your own progress. And then depending on the level you subscribe to, there's also a second blood work so you can now see how you're doing 6 months later. Now, by combining AI data, AI-powered insights, and human coaching together, 80% of Levels members improve their biomarkers. Now, as I mentioned, Levels is offering you, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, $100 off your first order if you use the promo code SHIELD at levels.com. And if you're interested in getting Levels for your department, email Josh Clemente, the founder and CEO of Levels, at josh@levels.com. And if you want to hear the origin story and so much more about this incredible company, listen to my interview with CEO and founder Josh Clemente on episode 1159 of the Behind the Shield podcast. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show paramedic, patient care director, and the writer of the film Code 3, Patrick Pianezza. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into EMS, the volunteer fire service, private ambulance, some of his notable and career calls, the college assignment that created Code 3, how he and his brother brought this to the screen, the proactive solution to our healthcare crisis, mental health in first responders, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of almost 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Patrick Pianezza. Enjoy. Well, Patrick, I want to say thank you so much for coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today. I watched Code 3 literally about 2 days ago and was so blown away how good it was. And I mean that. There's an absolute pile of shit when it comes to EMS and fire television out there, but this was really, really good. And so then I took a kind of deep dive into, who were the people behind it, because obviously there were real paramedics involved. And here we are. So I want to start by welcoming you onto the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad it resonated with you. That was one of the biggest things that I was passionate about, was making sure that we got it right.
Yeah, and you did, and I'm sure this has been a conversation for you before, but I think The Pit is another one this last year that did a really, really good job through a medic, doctor, nurse's eyes.
Yeah, the funny thing is, one of the people that plays a physician on The Pit, Aisha Harris, she plays one of the physicians in the later episodes, was a paramedic in our movie. So she had a line. Well, she had many lines. She's one of the characters there, and I would text her and say, like you went from paramedic to doctor in a year. Congratulations.
No, it was fantastic. Well, very first question, where on planet Earth are we finding you today?
I am in lovely Kiowa Island, South Carolina right now. I don't live here, but I'm fortunate enough to be able to do the holidays here. My wife's family have a place in Kiowa, and I went to college in South Carolina, so it's a little bit like coming home. So every Christmas, I get the opportunity to fly back to South Carolina and take in this incredibly beautiful scenery that you can't see, but it's really lovely.
Yeah, it's so funny. People have those screens behind them when we do the Zoom calls, and there's these beautiful leather-bound libraries, and you've got a grand piano over your right shoulder.
Yeah, right. Yeah, something you can obviously tell I play regularly. Unfortunately, I'm in a spare bedroom right now, so this looks way better than where I'm actually sitting.
All right. Well, speaking of, your origin story, tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Yeah, so this is great. I don't get a chance often to say this. What I tell everybody is I'm what happens when a small business owner and a physical therapist have a baby. You get somebody who gets their master's in healthcare administration. So I grew up in Springfield, Illinois. I was born in Springfield, Illinois, I should say. I grew up in a little town called Sherman, north of Springfield. And the family dynamic was fantastic. I've got a little brother who's 2 years younger than I am. We grew up in Central Illinois playing soccer. I played a little bit of football. Playing is probably being generous. I was on the team more than I played. But I had a lot of fun there. My dad had a bakery growing up, so we were always we learned the value of hard work very early on in life. We were in the bakery making bread a lot of the times, and my mom was a physical therapist. Her specialty was with kids with special needs and disabilities. So we would go out, and I was constantly exposed to that kind of stuff. So I was exposed to healthcare very early on, and I thought I wanted to be a doctor for the longest time until I found out I was allergic to organic chemistry. But we had a really great growing up. We were very fortunate. My mother never naturalized, so she was a Canadian citizen. So we would go visit her family in Montreal. So we kind of got that exposure to foreign languages and culture in Montreal. If for anybody who's never been there, in Quebec, it's very French. It's very European. It's a beautiful city. I love that city. And we got the opportunity to spend a lot of time up there. And then, like I said, grew up in the Midwest. And then my father was Italian. So we would go to Italy to go visit his family on occasion as well. So we really had a great time. It was a lot of fun growing up. And like I said, I was always drawn to the medicine side. Like as a child, I was really lucky. I really liked my pediatrician. I was one of those weird kids that really liked his doctor. And so I would ask him a million questions every time, assuming I wasn't like super sick. Like, how'd you do this? What do I have to do? And wanted to go to med school since an early age. And I came into EMS by complete accident. And fire department was like total accident. So I went to EMT school through a cavalcade of funny mistakes. And I just figured I might be useful. Something bad happens and it'll look good on a med school resume. So I'll go do EMT school, and fell in love with it. Just absolutely fell in love with it. My very first clinical shift ever, I walked in the ER. I didn't know anything about anything. And they were working a code in the trauma bay. And the charge nurse just said, "Hey, it's a good thing you're here. They're working a code. If you want to go check it out, you should go, they're doing it right now." And so I was very apprehensive, incredibly nervous, had no idea if I had the stomach for it. And back in those days, they had the hands paddles, like not the stickers. They had the old school like things you had to actually use. And I had opened the door, and you couldn't have scripted a more Hollywood moment. I opened the door, the doc leans over, clear, bam, and the guy jumps up off the test. And I was just like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I want to do this forever. and went straight from EMT to paramedic in like 2 years. I spent so much time in the emergency room doing clinical time that they were just like, would you please just put an app in and we'll just pay you to be here? And that's quite literally how I got my first job in healthcare. And I joined the fire department because I was too young to drive the ambulance. So I couldn't work for the ambulance company. But the Sherman Volunteer Fire Department, which I was a member of for about 4 years, I walked into the doors and the chief happened to be there and just said, "Hey, I have no interest in fire. I just want to do the medical stuff." And Chief Kuhn, great guy, put his arm around me. He goes, "What's that sign say out there?" And I said, "It's his fire department." He goes, "If you're going to be here, you're going to be a fireman." I said, "Okay, sign me up." And so I went through the fire academy and had a lot of fun with those guys too, and got to experience the fire service as well as EMS, and just have loved public safety ever since.
Going all the way back to your parents for a moment. Firstly, I used to work in upstate New York, so I'd go to Montreal on our days off every so often, and they have by far the wettest French toast I've ever had in my life. It's basically raw. It's like French toast sushi.
Yeah, yeah. There's a little bit of culture shock whenever you go up there. That the poutine, all of it. It was great. I loved it.
And then with your dad, was he first generation immigrant, or were his parents the immigrants?
No, he came over my grandfather came over on the boat. My dad was born in Italy, but naturalized here. So he naturalized before I was born.
So I'm always, because being an immigrant myself, even the kind of pros and the cons with your dad's immigration story, even your grandfather's maybe is a better perspective. What were the highs or the pros, and what were the cons that they experienced on their journey to this country?
So my grandfather would tell some stories. He was pretty cloistered about it. He didn't tell many, but he would let slip that when he came over in like the early 40s, I think is when he came over, they still had signs, no Italians wanted, no Irish or no Irish, Italians, or dogs like could apply, or something like really heinous stuff. But he never really talked about it all that much. He came in and apprenticed in New York and then moved to Chicago and started a bakery in Chicago. Once he got that started, he called for my grandmother and my dad to come, and then they came over. My dad would tell the story of when he was growing up in Chicago, where he was at, there was a lot of Italians, but it was still felt like outsider syndrome, a little imposter syndrome a little bit. And then, you move to Springfield, and I think we're one of like 3 families that spoke Italian in that city. We certainly had our people, but it was a little bit diminished. And my mom had a pretty easy. She spoke 4 languages, and she melded right in when she moved down here. But yeah, the pros certainly are, I have dual citizenship with here in Canada. I'm working on getting the paperwork filed to get my Italian so I can have EU citizenship as well. That comes with a lot of benefits, obviously. But the other benefit too was just culturally growing up in a household that spoke 2 languages, which was very unusual where I grew up, and being exposed to different cultures. And I know that like French and Italian, they are similar. I'm not making light of it, but like you go to Montreal is very different than Italy. But having the ability, and really the privilege to go to those 2 areas was fantastic. And having family there made it much easier, because it's not like, we certainly weren't millionaires. Like we would go there. It's not like we were staying at hotels. We were just going to grandma's house in really either country. But having the ability to travel like that, as a teenager and younger was very fortunate.
I think it just gives you a completely different perspective and lens on the world when you've just simply been to other places and you've seen other cultures. Because I'll give you, an example of ignorance in the UK. Supposedly we were supposed to hate the French. But then you go to France and there's all these beautiful people, and there's some dickheads, of course, like every country has them. But overall, they're beautiful people, and the amazing language. I love French, and you learn obviously about what happened in World War II, and then you see the nuanced conversation of this is tarring everyone with the same brush. And I think the ultimate enemy of prejudice is simply traveling. This is actually dropping your preconceived notions and just going to a place and looking around, immersing yourself. And well, lo and behold, they're just people just like you, mothers and fathers and siblings and kids that are playing and dogs that are barking. And it's amazing. So I wish everyone had the opportunity to travel, because it really would pull so many of us together, I think.
I 100% agree. I have been stranded in foreign countries and just made fast friends. And some of those people, who I don't know to this day, like shepherd me through some, you need to go over here. Or one of my favorites was we were in Italy, and we were supposed to get on a boat. I don't remember all the specifics. I was younger. I was a kid. But basically, we're looking at the pamphlet, right? And the pamphlet said, I don't know, the boat leaves at 3 or something. And we were trying to find the right dock or whatever to get back. And one of the locals was like, no, the boat leaves at 2. And we were like, this says 3. And they're like, everybody knows it's at 2. Like, you got to go over here, go talk to Jimmy. He's the one who lets you on the boat. So, yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I think that the more people go out there and experience other cultures, like you said, yeah, there's going to be dicks, but by and large, in my experience, people are people, and they're nice. They're just nice people. People are people, and are willing to help, most of them.
Absolutely. Going to the physical therapy, especially in the special needs community, have you had any conversations with your mom about the evolution of that world? Because especially, through the last 22 years now, when we had a lot of our veterans coming back and that kind of adaptive athlete thing really started evolving. And now we're seeing, young men with Down syndrome doing Ironman triathlons, and, cerebral palsy powerlifters, and, what once was a population that was kind of kept in institutions away from everyone else, now they're front and center and celebrated.
Yeah, I wish she was still around to be able to see all of the changes that have occurred. Unfortunately, she passed in 2016, so she got a little bit of it. But I mean, when we were growing up, we're talking 80s, early 90s, it was not unusual to hear the word retarded thrown around in what would be considered an appropriate phrase, like the school for retarded children. Now, I'm well aware that word is wrong, but back then that was the nomenclature of the time. And she worked for some of those facilities and was always a passionate advocate for them. In fact, she helped. She didn't build it, but I know that she was somehow involved in the first adaptive park in Springfield, Illinois, where kids with wheelchairs, could get on a swing and stuff like that. So that's always, in retrospect, is very heartwarming. But to see that kind of passion before it was the right thing to do, before it was like in vogue, she always had a passion for that population, and always did her best to make sure that those people were seen and felt as equal members of society. In fact, she would make my brother and I go to one of the schools that she would work at to meet the kids. And I'll never forget, I remember I couldn't have been more than like 6 or 7 years old. And, it was like, well, what's wrong with that kid? And my mom said, there's nothing wrong with them. They're just different. And I'll always remember that teaching, because to me it was, you're 5, 6 years old. That kid doesn't operate like I do, like what's wrong with him? And it's like, there's nothing wrong. You just need to, shift the way you look at it. And that's one of those things that's always stuck with me.
That's funny, because that mirrors a phrase that I really love when you're talking about someone's behavior in general. So they could be, distraught, they could be angry, whatever it is. But rather than saying what's wrong with you, you say, you say what happened to you. And, that obviously that person with the anger, they may have just learned that their, loved one passed away 2 days, before. And so you start to unpack, the root cause of this behavior. And it's the same with what you're talking about. There's nothing wrong with them. But what happened to you? Well, when, my mother was delivering me, the air was cut off. And that's why now, I have these deficits. So it's even with the physical side, that's a great way of reframing it. It's like, well, what happened to you? What's your backstory? And, what are your parameters and your capabilities? Yeah. And then that gives you this whole scope then to work with. And then we see freaking, paraplegic climbing ropes in their wheelchairs and all these things. That I think it's so amazing. And I'm sure she'd probably be beaming from ear to ear to see what that community is doing these days.
Oh, she'd be overjoyed. And like I said, even back in the day, she was a fierce advocate of making sure that they felt seen, and especially she was very good. Her specialty was in pediatrics. And so like just embracing those children and making them feel valued had huge ripple effects. I mean, I can tell you on her funeral or the day of her funeral, I'm not kidding when I say like my brother and my father had no idea that the impact, like we knew that people liked her and loved her obviously, but like when I say there was a line stretching around the building, like it blew us away. Like people were coming to us that we had never met, that my mom had worked with either their child or their teacher or something. And it was like story after story. The very first person was telling us the story about how my mom made an impact on their kid and was like, the doctor said my kid would never walk again. And, here they are. And it's just like tears. And it's just like, like things that you're always the hero of your own story. And my mom wouldn't tell, like to her, it was like, that was what she did. She would never like stand on a podium and be like, I am so great that, I did this, but just story after story after story was incredible.
Yeah, that's amazing. When you were talking earlier, you were talking about organic chemistry. I wanted to be a firefighter when I was young, was told school age that I was colorblind, and they were told me, you can't be a firefighter, you can't be a pilot. So then the other thing I wanted to do was medicine. So I'm like, all right, well then I'll be a doctor, until I got to the maths. And I'm like, okay, I won't be a doctor. So had a similar path than you. And then years later, when I found fire and EMS, I kind of debunked these myths that I was told as a child. I realized it wasn't actually the physician behind the desk that I wanted to be. I didn't even know what a paramedic was, but that was it. I wanted to be, the kind of cartoon hero out in the street saving lives type of doctor. And, that's obviously EMS. So what made you even kind of go towards that journey? And if before that, talk to me more about the academic barriers to you going through traditional medicine.
Well, for me, it was like you, very similar. Like I am kind of a paradox in this. I find the math and the sciences, all sciences, to be incredibly fascinating. In fact, my wife gets annoyed with me because I will sit down and happily watch what I lovingly refer to as nerdy YouTube about like astrophysics or mathematic theories and stuff. And it truly, it's one of the things that I'm just in amazement with. I enjoy it. To me, it's fascinating. Don't ask me to recreate any of what they're doing. Like I can't do it. But I struggled in math my whole life. I've had positions where I was in charge of large analytic departments, data analytics and statistical processing for large health systems. But I literally have difficulty doing math in my head. Like if you give me like 7 + 5, it takes me like if I have a piece of paper, it's fine. But if you ask me off the cuff, I can't do it. And I've been in charge of, like I said, very large analytics processes for health systems, which is fine. As long as I have a computer or some adaptive device, I guess, a piece of paper, something, I'm really good at making data tell a story. I'm not so good at cranking the data out myself. But so, yeah, those were huge hindrances for me. I mean, every standardized test I would take for math or chemistry, I was always good in biology, but chemistry, organic chemistry, physics, anything like that, I struggled with a lot in high school and in college because it was the applicability of that work was so hard for me, but I understood it as for whatever reason, as soon as it transitioned into biology, like the Krebs cycle, how we make ATP, like I could tell you, I could figure that out. I understand it. But like, if you just throw sodium and chloride together and, 25 grams of this and 14 grams of that, how many grams of salt do you get? I have no idea. I can't do that. But I know the body needs salt and I know what it does in the body. So that was always, that's where I always struggled. And I would take these courses. Like I took chemistry 111 and 112. Both of those times I took those classes twice to get a passing grade. Organic chemistry I took twice to get a passing grade. It was like biology, I was getting A's, and the general chemistries and mathematics, like algebra 1 and 2, took both those classes twice. So from an academic standpoint, in those rote classes, they were very challenging for me. But when I found a way to apply those sciences and those maths, like in being a paramedic, all of a sudden everything clicked into place, and I was very good at that part of it. But yeah, that was always a challenge. I always struggled with this idea of like, I know I'm smart, but I can't prove it. that was always one of the challenges. And so having the opportunity to operate on one of my strengths, which is, writing and communications, getting a major in that, and then minoring in the medical humanities really helped out. And then discovering that there was a master's in healthcare administration really blew my mind, and got into that program and really excelled that way. And so I was able to transition a lot of clinical work into administrative work for, like I was saying before, mostly in patient experience programs across the country. But yeah, those academic barriers were there. I was always good at reading, writing. I was mediocre in the sciences if it wasn't biology or biology related. And then like math and chemistry, I was just like, the professors would just shake their head and be like, how many times do we got to tell you this? And I was like, until it sticks, man, let's go. This is what you're paid to do.
Well, you mentioned about not being old enough to drive the ambulance. Was the volunteer fire department the first place you were working as an EMT or medic?
As all the way up to paramedic, the fire department was the only place I could work, because I could drive, for some reason, the silly thing in Illinois, I could drive an 85-foot long fire truck, but I couldn't drive an ambulance because their insurance, you had to be 21 or 22 in order to be covered by their insurance program. But I also worked in the emergency room, which made me a much better medic. So coming out of EMT school, because I started, as soon as I got my EMT, I jumped into the emergency room and worked night shift. And the beauty of that was that it was a level 1 trauma center and a burn center. So learning medications as an EMT, learning what happens in the hospital setting, made me a much better medic for when I did get on the street. And so then supplement that, with the fire service, which 85% of all calls at fire service run are medical anyway, was really a beautiful way to come up in this business. And then when I transferred to the University of South Carolina, the South Carolina would not recognize my fire credentials, but they would recognize my paramedic. And so I went straight paramedic and worked 911 all through the rest of my undergrad and graduate program. And so all of those skill sets and all of that experience in hospital and on the fire service made me a much better medic when I became, quote, a full-time paramedic.
That's what I saw, and that's what I tried to do, when I was a medic as well, is, you had the one end of the spectrum, which was your cookbook medic, where, they just went to the page and, okay, this thing. And, and then you had the critically thinking paramedic, who obviously might be kind of nuancing whatever the presentation is. It might be a combination of 2 or 3 different things, but also what would the hospital need? Are they going to have to do a CT? Can we put large bore IVs in, et cetera, and trying to set them up so there's a continuance of care versus now they're having to do IVs, or in some places they even got to draw blood before we got there. So, setting them up for success. And that was, obviously ultimately the best thing for the patient. And even, the right facility, like my last place, a lot of them, that weren't really into the job anymore would just take a stroke patient to the nearest facility versus a comprehensive stroke care, center, so that if it is a bleed, for example, that you're in the right place. So I did see that myself. The more you kind of either in your clinicals or you just care enough to set them up for success in that facility, in my opinion, the better medic you were. If you just took them to the door, offloaded them and walked away and didn't, follow up on, hey, what happened? What did you find? Were there any scans? What was in the blood work? I felt like that was kind of the hard stop as your growth as a medic. But if you cared about that continuance of care, I think that was kind of how you kept improving your medic skills as you progressed through your career.
I was very lucky. I had a fantastic paramedic instructor who worked in the emergency room where I was working. And so we were coworkers before he became my paramedic instructor. And one of the things that he would always, whenever we were doing clinical time on the ambulance, whenever we'd bring somebody in, if he was working, he'd say, all right, great report. What do you think is going on? And so then, you had to be on your toes. Like, well, I think this is a GI bleed, or I think this is, that. And what was funny was a lot of the physicians would then, once you were out of school, they would continue that. And especially, like I said, I still worked in the ER. They'd be like, all right, doctor, what do you think is going on?
So it's interesting, with the volunteer fire department that has a paramedic on staff, what did that look like? Because, you usually in volunteer fire, you might have maybe an EMT level, if that, but you had quite a high level on the EMS side. So what was that dynamic? Did they use you as a full medic?
They couldn't. So we were only an EMT level fire department. So even though I was a paramedic, I didn't have the drugs or the monitor, the manual monitor. We had AEDs obviously, but like there was an inability to go above the EMT level just because of the supplies that were there. Like I couldn't start a line if I wanted to. We didn't have an IV bag or a drip set or anything like that. However, what I like to do, and I still do, I'm kind of an educator at heart, is when we would do monthly trainings, if it was medical, I wasn't the only paramedic, obviously, but there was a few of us, and we would do the education, the monthly education on medicine. So like 1 month it would be, airway, another month it would be, cardiology. And so we would do that kind of thing. And then on scene, what that helped us out with is when the ambulance would come to pick up our patients, if there was one of us that were a medic, then it was a medic to medic conversation. Like, hey, I think this is what's going on. Here's what I've done. Like, go forth and do good things. But it really helped me out in reverse. So when I went through the fire academy, it was really funny. One of my still to this day best friends on this planet went through the fire academy with us because I think there was like 5 or 6 people who showed up the first day. And as we got on to like month 2 or 3, Jake and I were the only 2 people that survived. And Jake was very, very good at the fire service and not very good at the medicine side. And we absolutely hated each other. Like, I can't stress this enough. We hated each other when we first met. I don't know what it is, but it's one of those things where it's like you just look at somebody and you're like, no, I don't like this guy. We're never going to be friends. And somewhere around like the 3rd or 4th month, we looked around the room and it was just the 2 of us. And so whenever you're doing like drills and how do you RIT team stuff, and I'm failing because I haven't done fire in a very long time, but all the necessary things for extrication or breaching or saving your partner if they're down kind of thing. It was just 2 of us. That's it. It was just the 2 of us. And we had this wonderful little heart to heart. And I said, listen, you're not good at medicine. I am. I'm not good at fire and you are. So let's make this work. And we ended up becoming very close friends. And to this day, he's still one of my closest friends. But yeah, I remember going through all of that. I've never served in the military. I'm not claiming that kind of relationship, but to me, it's got to be similar to something that you would go through in boot camp, because both of us just became really close friends. And it's one of the proudest things that I think I've had is maintaining that friendship, and still to this day being able to call him and see what's going on. And now he serves as the assistant chief, which cracks me up. But yeah.
What about career calls? Before we progress into the EMS only side that you've transitioned to, what were some of the career calls in the volunteer fire department?
Well, I think for us, we were a fire service first. And so when you're talking about career calls, like we would do things where we couldn't take our vehicle to the scene. The way we operated was you had to go to the firehouse, get your gear and the truck, and then take the fire truck to wherever the call was. And so learning from the fire side about scene size up, scene safety, and how to do an appropriate assessment of the situation before implementing a plan, to me is one of those lifelong learnings that I've taken with me all the way through the work in the administrative realms that I've had. As far as like career calls, I'm trying to think of the best way to answer this question. Like, we had lots of bad calls and lots of interesting calls. Like we were a very rural department. So there was a few fires that we had to fight that were large industrial farmland fires that were really bad. Jake, the guy I told you about, we were in a house that literally exploded because we were making entry into something. And to this day, Jake saved my life. He realized how hot the building was getting before I did, and said, basically, the very short version of the story is, we need to get out of here. It's hot. And as we came out of it's one of those moments where we dropped the hose and hightailed it towards the door. And as we got to the door, the whole thing flashed. And had he not been there, I wouldn't have realized it that quickly. So that call always sticks with me. We were in a barn that was burning, and him and I were on the nozzle, or I was on the nozzle, and he was backing me up. And it was completely pitch black. You couldn't see anything. And as we rotated, the water would hit this something, and you just hear this searing and this bubbling sound. And, push some more water over here, push the smoke back. You come over this way, something, you would hear it hit something and sizzle, pop, and bubbling sound. And then we got the call that the fire had already gone through the other side. So back out, surround and drown operation. So once the building finally burned down, we went and retraced our steps, and literally 15 feet from where we were standing, like our boot prints were still in the mud. You turn around and it was a 55-gallon drum of diesel fuel that was off-gassing that we were hitting with the water. So yeah, those were some big calls that we were on. On the medical side, we had some the interstate ran through our district. And so we would get some pretty gnarly wrecks, especially in the winter in Illinois, ice up, some really good extrication stuff. But yeah, I mean, as far as career calls go, like there are those calls that just stick with you more so. I mean, the patient outcomes are the things that you remember, but also the opportunities to bond with the people that you work with, to realize that like it is a team that ensures that you go home at the end of the day. And those are the things that I always remember. That's the stuff that to me is important, because at the end of the day, it's about the partners that you have, and everybody looking out for one another. That's one of the things I loved about the fire service, and EMS. But it was always about, rule number one, you and I go home at the end of the day. Rule number two, we're going to make sure that, the people we take care of get the best care they can.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned going to South Carolina for the education side. So what was different then when you found yourself in an EMS only paid department as well?
It was really big culture shock, to be honest. So I'd gotten my associate's degree in biology in Springfield at Lincoln Land, and then transferred to South Carolina. And when I came here, they run a county-based EMS system, which is different than anything that I had ever been exposed to. So it was government only, not only, there was private services and still are, but I was only interested in 911. So 911 at the time was only handled by the county. And they had a lot more structure around EMS. And so standardized trucks, uniforms were the same. I'm trying to think, like they had a training program that was really robust. And it was the first time that, this sounds really bad, but it was the first time I saw it as a professional profession. Not that it wasn't in Illinois, but Illinois was kind of piecemealed together. So there were only private ambulances that would do transports. They did handle 911. Most of it was inter-facility. There was like 4 or 5 competing private ambulance companies. So it wasn't run in a standardized methodology. I worked for one of those companies for a very short period of time. And even the way the ambulances were stocked different to company to company. So I come to South Carolina and we would run anywhere from 10 to 14 trucks a day. And any one of those trucks I could get in and out of, and I knew exactly where the BVMs were. I knew where the drugs were, and it didn't matter. So it was really fascinating to see that being organized that way. And we handled all, if not most of all the 911 in Lexington County. And to me, it was what I really wanted. It wasn't all obviously emergent. Anybody who's worked this job for more than 10 minutes knows not every call is an emergency. But it was all calls that came in via 911. And so for me, it was really fulfilling work. It was what I wanted to do at that point in time. And I was going to college during the day. So I would work night shift on the ambulance, and I would go to class during the day. And so I would have textbooks on the dashboard. I'd be doing homework in between calls. And we would staff EMT paramedic. And so obviously if it was anything that required ALS care, unfortunately it was my call. So I would have paperwork, and then I would have homework. And it was just depending on what I was doing, which book or which laptop I was reaching for.
So what about that period? Obviously there are a lot of scenes in Code 3, and we'll get to that. But again, career calls, funny calls, what are the ones that fit that chapter of your life?
Well, I mean, you're asking, how do I condense 12 years into something? And we did our best to do that with the film. But I mean, one of my favorite calls that I wrote that we didn't get into the movie because my director didn't believe it. But I think the best call I think I've ever ran, bar none, high bar here. We walk into this house and the officer has a wooden spoon and is banging it against the washing machine, just clang, 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 clang. And by this point in time, I'd known this officer, and I was just like, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Just go talk to your patient." And he's sitting there he's slapping this washing machine with a wooden spoon. So we start talking to this woman, and she has suffered, unfortunately, from a mental break and believes that there are green men coming out of the washing machine stealing her underwear. And so it's kind of like, okay, this is nice. There's nothing medically wrong besides with her delusions. So it's not like we're worried about, cardiac or anything else. We were just like, all right, well, let's get you on the stretcher and get ready to take you to the hospital, make sure, get you away from these these terrible gremlins that are bothering you. And to his credit, the reason why this call stands out to me, and I think is still the greatest call I've ever ran, is as we're getting to the door jamb, he draws his weapon and points it at the washing machine. And he goes, "All right, you sons of bitches, you leave this nice lady alone," and kicked the door shut to the washing machine. And I'm not kidding you, this 70, 80-year-old woman swooned in the stretcher. It was just like my hero. And we took her to the hospital to go get cared for. But to me, it's one of those things where it's like compassion meets one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. And it meant the world to her. And so it's I think one of the greatest calls I've ever been a part of in my life. And I still rib him whenever I see him about it. You still killing gremlins? He goes, "No, that was the last one. I never had to deal with them again." But yeah, that call always sticks with me. It's one of my favorites. But the other ones too, where I didn't know this at the time, but we went on a call that was fairly significant, respiratory distress, severe extremis, getting ready to bag this gentleman. We put him on CPAP instead, and he did well on CPAP. And so we take him to the hospital, first time event with CHF, and I go to class the next day. And this person, one of my classmates, is just staring at me. And I don't know the student. I mean, Carolina's a big school, and this was like Econ 101. There's like 200, 300 students in this classroom. So it's not like I was friends with all of them, but this person's just staring at me. And so I finally go up to him and I'm like, "What's going on, man? Like you've been staring at me for like literally all of class." And he goes, "Do you work for the county?" And I said, "I do." He goes, "Did you go to this address?" And I was like, "I don't know, man. Like I run a million calls. You're going to have to tell me more than an address." And he tells me about this call. And sure enough, like I had taken care of this guy, this person's father. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I remember that call. We got him to the hospital and that was it." And I was like, "Why? What's up?" And he just starts crying, like just tears start shedding immediately. And I'm just standing here. I'm not in uniform. Like I said, I look like a regular college student. And this man is just crying in front of me, and I have no idea what to do. I'm just like, "Oh, I'm thinking, of course, I'm like, did he die? Did I do something wrong?" Like I'm making it about me, as like, obviously I should, because I'm like, "Oh Jesus, what did I do wrong?" And he pulls himself together, and he just says, he spent almost a week in the ICU. He had to have a open heart surgery, and they had put him on ECMO and all of these things. And he's made it. And he was like, "And I just want to tell you, thank you." And like, at that point I start crying. I'm like, "Oh God," like not what I was expecting at all. I was kind of expecting you've been served. But like, I was like, "Oh man, that's really cool." And we never kept in touch. I didn't want to make it weird. I was just like, I'm really glad he had a good outcome. I have no idea what happened after that. But that was always one of those things where it was just, to me, it was one of those, it was a Tuesday, right? Like it was a run of the mill call. I'm glad we could help out. But to be able to see the after effects of what you did was really moving to me in a way that I still think about. To me, it's really important. And then there's, the darker side of stupidity that happens in EMS. I had a call where um, a really significantly sick child, infant, maybe 3 months old, and walk in, and we're at the opposite end of the county from a hospital, so it's 45 minutes running hot no matter what. Like there's no way, unless you get a helicopter involved, like it's a long transport. Kids head bobbing, snoring, it's bad. Grabbed the kid. I was like, we're not wasting time. Let's go. Hustle off to the truck and start laying out all my equipment, getting ready to go. And it was one of those funny moments where I talked to this 3-month-old. And I just remember telling this kid, I go, listen, if your heart rate drops below 60, I'm going to drill a hole in your leg. And the kid just nodded. And I was like, cool, we're on the same page. And so, nebulizing and all the things that you do to make sure that they have a good outcome, trying to start an IV on them. And I just realized, like, I need to suction this kid out. And so I, start going through all the equipment, and, all I got in there is a French catheter that's 8 feet long and kinked and just doesn't work. And it dawns on me, we have a bulb syringe, but it's in the OB kit. So I was like, perfect. That's exactly what I need and what I want. I grab the OB kit, tear it open, find the suction the kid out. We get to the hospital. Kid marginally better, still very, very sick. Did not have to intubate him, thankfully. Did not have to start an IO on this poor child. But I was able to start a line on him, and, all the things that, you get to put your cape on and feel like a good boy for. Get done, get a high five from the doctor. I believe the child had pneumonia or something. It was bad. 3 or 4 days later, I get a phone call from one of the administrators at where I worked. And I get this phone call that's like, what were you thinking? And I was like, there's no context, right? Like that's how the phone call starts. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's this pediatric call, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember that call. Like got a high five from the ER doc. Like that's what what we live for. You opened up an OB kit. Why? Because I needed a bulb syringe. Do you know how expensive bulb syringes or OB kits are? We had to restock an entire OB kit. And like, that's the kind of stuff where I just check out. I'm like, no, we did everything right. We had a good outcome, and I'm getting yelled at because OB kits are expensive. And that conversation kept going for probably about 15 minutes, and it ended with me being not so polite, telling them to stock bulb syringes outside of the OB kit if their primary concern was the cost of the OB kit.
Well, I want to get to that because I know you found yourself more on the admin side. But just before we do, because it's a topic that the film definitely hits, which I love the way it does it amongst the comedy, but is the mental health conversation, the burnout, etc. Prior to you going to the admin side, what was your experience as far as the impact of the job on your physical and or mental health at that point?
I mean, it was bad. I've been very open about my struggle with burnout and my journey through it. And I tell people too, like if people knew me in the early 2000s, like I was not a nice person. I was very burnt out. I was difficult to be around. I'm very fortunate. I've also said this too. I was very fortunate that I never struggled with drug addiction or suicidality or stuff like that. And that doesn't make me better, stronger, whatever than anybody who does. I was just very fortunate that I was just a callous, cynical, sarcastic asshole for part of it, especially when you got me going. But for me, it was about like the little things that I felt just kept becoming insurmountable, right? Like the bulb syringe thing, the pay certainly was a problem. It was all of these things that continued to get layered. And it was difficult. I was lucky. One of my roommates liked to work out, so we would do that, and we worked opposite shift. So thankfully we never worked together. We were just roommates, but like every day at like 2:00, we both worked night shift, which was great. At like 2:00 in the afternoon, right after you got up, we would force each other to go to the gym. And so we would go work out. So from a physical health standpoint, I was probably a little bit better. But from an emotional mental health standpoint, it wasn't. It was a lot of self-blame, a lot of anger. And back then, again, late 90s, early 2000s, like asking for help was weakness. It always was. And one of the things that we put in the movie that unfortunately got cut It was a very real conversation I had with one of my supervisors where I was using the words burnt out. I went up to them and I just said, "Hey, like I was always very good at IVs for whatever reason. That was one of the skill sets I was very gifted with. Didn't matter if you were, a diabetic or on dialysis, like I could usually get a stick on anybody. And for like a week straight, I couldn't do it. And I remember going up to this person and I've told this story before. And the reason I don't name names is I'm not mad at them. They did not have a better answer. So this is not like they are broken, they're terrible supervisors, leaders, whatever, and that I'm in the wrong or they're in the wrong. They didn't have a better answer. But I went to them and I just said, listen, I think I'm burning out. And I don't know what's what. I was like, I can't start an IV. I can't hit the broadside of a barn. And that person just chuckled, just started to laugh almost uncontrollably and said, we're all burnt out. Get back on the truck. And that was the first and only time I ever asked for help. And so then that just starts to compound on everything else. And so it was kind of like this is my burden to bear kind of thing. Like I'm doing all of this so society can function. And it was never a God complex or superhero complex, but it was just at the time what felt like a realization, like, yeah, this doesn't get better. And there are people that gets very, very dark and very depressing and leads to a lot of negative outcomes. Like I've said before, I've had 6 coworkers, not just at that location, and I'm not besmirching one place, but over my lifetime, I've lost 6 coworkers to suicide. 7. And so I don't want to see that number grow. And I'm a huge advocate of whatever we can do to help the people out there still doing the job. Because I don't want anybody to have the answer that was given to me. And again, not their fault. The resources have gotten much better, but we still have a problem.
In all the conversations I've had over the last 9 years, I've become a perpetual student, and it's just the Venn diagram is overlined so powerfully on what the main issues are, and unaddressed childhood issues, struggles, trauma, etc., that we bring into the job of absolutely a part of it. What we see, a part of it, sleep deprivation, massive part of it. If you look at the correlation with that and mental health. But one of the most what's the right word? I always have brain farts in the middle of these conversations. Under recognized elements is also organizational stress or even organizational betrayal. And I think that's where, especially in EMS only, when you work in the hospitals, now you've got this profit side and you've got the people that are trying to save lives. And there's this moral injury where, poor decisions by leadership in fire, EMS, or the healthcare system are negatively affecting the ability for the medics and doctors and nurses to simply do their job.
Absolutely. And I think that's the right angle for it. I was reading something recently, and it's like if you call it burnout, it ends up becoming a places of blame on the provider versus moral injury, where there are circumstances and logistics that are way outside of your control that are inhibiting you from being able to deliver the care that they need or that you want to be able to deliver. And to me, I think that's the right way to look at it. And I will give grace to administration too. Like nobody gets into this job going, all I want to do is save money and make sure everybody dies, right? Like we're not cartoon villains. There are a myriad of small, what seemingly are independent decisions that cause problems in the grand scheme of things.
So what made you ultimately, pull the trigger as far as transitioning away from an actual, working paramedic to getting into the other side, the management administration side?
I was very, very lucky. And so what happened to me was I went to grad school. I was still on the ambulance in grad school, getting my master's in healthcare administration. And I was always interested in doing emergency preparedness or doing something in that vein, either emergency preparedness, emergency response type stuff. And that was where I was. And I had the opportunity to do basically an internship in rural health policy, which is the first time I'd ever done policy work. So I spent, I'd call it about 8 months in this rural health policy center, which was fascinating, opened my eyes up to that kind of work. And then the thing that really clicked with me was, how do we make sure that the patients understand the care that they're getting? And I was also deeply interested in PIO work when I actually interned as the PIO for Lexington County for a summer. and really loved that job. My undergrad's in public relations. Like, I enjoy writing and speaking and educating and things like that. So to me, that was always a natural fit. But what happened was the last semester of grad school, I met a hospital CEO that was deeply ingrained in something called Studer Group. And they're a company that if the listeners have never heard of, they quite literally wrote the book on patient experience and employee engagement for hospitals. And Quint Studer is the guy that wrote the book, Hardwiring Excellence. Still an excellent read. I still highly recommend it. And as a young and dumb college student, in the back of his first generation of the book had his email address, and I'd read the book for some class, and I was like, "Dear Quint, I'm a grad student at Carolina. I need a master's level project to finish my degree. Do you need a grad student?" And I still have the email. It was one word back, "Sure," and then contact HR. And so that's how I got started at inpatient experience. So I called the HR lady at the company. I said, "Hey, I got this email back from Quint. Is this something that's real, or was he just going through a million emails that day?" And I got very fortunate. I was the first ever grad student that Studer Group hired, and I got to see firsthand the administrative processes that are put in place in order for clinicians to be successful, specifically in the realm of patient communications and patient experience. And really, when that company was on the come up, so I spent 6 months almost with them, and I was shadowing arguably one of the most important consultants in the field. For anybody who's listening that's ever heard of the ADIT, which is a healthcare mnemonic, this man wrote the ADIT, and so I was able to learn directly from him. And that really set my path on fire. So I've never worked administratively for any EMS system. I've only worked in hospital and healthcare systems. But that was really where my career took a sharp right turn. In fact, when I got my first job in California as a manager of service excellence for a hospital, I still worked on the ambulance. I had 2 jobs, and the job that I had taken in the hospital was paying much more handsomely than EMS ever could. And, but I was always nervous. I'd always worked 2 jobs. And my boss at the hospital called me in, and he said, "Look, I know you're still working weekends over at the ambulance company. You can't do that anymore. Like, I need you here. It's your choice to make. Like, you either work there or you work here. I can't have you working both." And he was a great boss, fantastic boss, still one of my early mentors and friends to this day. And I handed him my paramedic card, my California paramedic card, and I just said, "If I ask for this again, you have to fire me." He said, "All right," and that's when I officially left EMS and started working full time administratively in hospitals. But that was how I got there. It was I always imagined that I would go be a PIO and stand in front of a camera and go, "Here's where the cloud is. Don't go to the cloud," and then was lucky enough to fall into consulting. And that's something that I really had a passion for, because it got to combine what I was really passionate about: making sure patients get good care, making sure they get communicated to, making sure we're demystifying medicine, and I get to teach. So it was this lovely Venn diagram of what speaks to me. And I did that for 14 years until a movie came out.
Well, before we go to the movie, which I definitely want to take a deep dive into, if you were king for a day, having such a nuanced view of healthcare, the pre-hospital world, and then the management and the patient care world, in that setting, what would you change to improve healthcare in America?
Universal healthcare. Like, I mean, the easy answer, right? The very simple answer is, well, just increase pay and everything gets better. Yes, comma. You can't increase pay in this current climate without talking about reimbursement rates, the way that EMS is handled by both state, federal, and insurance companies. And so the quickest way to get there is universal healthcare. And there is a way to do it. I don't claim to, I don't have the binder that says if you do it this way, healthcare gets fixed. But there are systematic issues that are being held together by duct tape and chicken wire that fundamentally need to be readdressed. And I have always been an advocate of The US healthcare system is completely broken. It does not work the way it's supposed to. It does not deliver better care. We could prove that quantitatively and qualitatively than other first world nations out there. So there are glaring red sirens everywhere. So I am of the belief that we need to blow it up and fix it from the ground up, and we have the ability to do so, but it takes dedicated work and the understanding that you are not going to get the benefits from all. Even if I changed it today, those benefits aren't going to be seen for 5 or 10 years.
It's so interesting / maddening that the principles behind so many solutions are really, very, very simple if you look at it. I had a conversation the other day, I forget who it was now, and I think it was a physician, and he was talking about healthcare is 20% of our GDP in this country, which is an insane amount. So where's the money? There is all this money. And if you look at, it's something that I talk about a lot at the moment on the first responder side, it's changing the firefighter work week to a 24/72, a healthy 42-hour work week. And people, again, well, how are we going to hire all these people? It's like, well, how much do you spend on overtime? How much do you lose on lack of retention? How much is your workman's comp premiums, line of duty death payments, medical disabilities, lawsuits on mistakes that overworked firefighters and paramedics make? There is your money. And I always use, the healthcare system as a comparison when you look at the UK. I grew up, I'm a 70s child, so I grew up when the NHS was still doing very well and it was fully supported. And most importantly, I would argue that the nation was very healthy. Aside from cigarettes, as far as, obesity, we really didn't have much of anything. We had the builders that had a bit of a beer belly, that was it. But that's been picked apart, and the American kind of model has been pushed on them. And then the value of a healthy society hasn't been prioritized. So as British people have got fatter and sicker, obviously it's strained the healthcare system. And I think the most beautiful win-win of national health is not only a beautiful altruistic model where you all roll your sleeves up a nation and say, we'll all go to work, and when you need the help, we'll give it to you. You're pregnant, you're going to have a baby, here we go, we'll take care of you. You're elderly, we'll take care of you. You got hit by a bus, we'll take care of you. But it also then, I think the main motivation is to make the nation healthy, because if you've got a tax-based, universal healthcare system, now the fewer patients, the better, the more resources and doctors and nurses and beds that you have for the people that really need it. So the money is there, as we know, as you've said, we spend so much and actually comparatively have a worse healthcare system than most of the world. So it's just taking that, downstream money and front loading it into a system. Because, people that have no concept in this country what it's like to have some sort of treatment, go to hospital in the UK, for example, and just walk out. Not think, how am I going to pay the tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars back because I had the audacity to have cancer or need a cath. So I couldn't agree more, coming from the UK, now being in America for 20 plus years. I think that's a solution as well, but it takes courage, doesn't it? To get past the egos and the knee jerks and get people to see just the common sense and the mathematics behind it.
Absolutely. And this isn't like Patrick's not a capitalist. Not that I would worry defending myself here, because I've got science to back me up on it. But to your point exactly, people will start to say immediately, do you have any idea how much this costs? And it's like, do you realize how much we're spending now? Like Medicare and Medicaid are going to run out of money because lots of issues. And to be absolutely clear to anybody's listening, this is not like there's one simple solution. You flick a light switch and that's the problem. It's myriads of systemic problems that, like you said, were born out of, I would argue, people's best interests that balloon and circle out of control. Now, there are huge issues that started even the year that I was born, the Ronald Reagan administration, when he deregulated healthcare. That started a cacophony of issues that to this day need to be remedied. But yeah, if people could stomach the fact that this is going to hurt and it's going to be better in the long run, there is a chance that in your lifetime you will see small benefits, but generations after you will be better off. I like I said, I'm not smart enough to be able to tell you like I've got the answer to all of it, but I do know that there's a path forward that works for arguably every other country in the world. So like we are not that special.
Well, this is the thing. I'll give you the perfect example. The firefighter helmet. there is an absolute refusal to change the helmet. And there's this confusion with that being tradition and all that stuff. It's like, no, it's a hat. Like once that was the latest, greatest thing. It was the newest thing. Before people weren't wearing helmet. Like, what are you, a pussy? You're going to buy a helmet? Now all of a sudden we're romanticizing this helmet that's literally about 90 years old by that point. And that is not, the latest and greatest. And people make fun of the European helmets. And I'm like, all right, well then make an American version. If you need to develop the latest, greatest in America, that's fine. But for fuck's sake, make it. Don't just lean on this one and say, oh, I'll wear this till I die, because you will, because it's shit and it is full of carcinogens and all the things. And it's the same thing, that resistance to change because of this arguably narcissistic, ego-driven facade that you are the greatest country in the world and everything that we do is better than anyone else, rather than going, there are areas of what we do in our culture that are phenomenal, and there are areas that we do that aren't so good. And 70% of the nation being obese or overweight is a good example that maybe not everything that we're doing is working properly. The fact that our children have to rehearse their murders in their schools, maybe it's not the greatest thing. So having the humility to say, all right, the UK, not even now, like what was the original plan of the NHS and how did it go wrong for you? And what can we do to make it better? Norway, tell me about your prisons, Portugal, drug decriminalization, Finland, your education system. And if we just had the humility to look at other countries that are doing things well, arguably better than us, then the rising tide lifts all ships and we will improve the things that need improving too. But as you said, if we're ego driven, we're just going to keep sinking.
I agree. And I think part of that goes all the way back to, again, I have a very unique outlook because I'm first generation. I had the opportunity to go to multiple countries as part of my growing up. And so I didn't have the nationalist streak. I'm certainly patriotic and grateful that I'm an American, but I didn't suffer from we're the only country and we're the only ones that get it right. So I think there's a distinct line there. But the other thing too is like, I remember, again, like 6 years old, kindergarten, first grade, whatever. And I was like, I'm Canadian, go Canada. And that doesn't play well in Central Illinois. So it's like, it's, I always laughed at that. Like, yeah, I'm fortunate. I have two passports. And so like, you're asking me to pick which one's better. And it's like, well, what's the question we're answering?
Yeah, exactly. French toast, I'd say Canada.
Yeah.
I mean, not Canada, America, excuse me, America. All right, well then let's kind of move forward from there back to writing. At what point, as we've progressed through your life story so far, did the idea of even putting some of your experiences as a paramedic on paper?
So this is one of those funny things too. So remember I said my undergrad's in public relations. And at the time, part of the program required me to take a creative writing class. It was just a homework assignment. This entire film was an accident. It was a homework assignment. I had come off this 14-hour shift that was supposed to be 12. So, just gnarly. And I almost didn't go to class that day. And it was at 10 o'clock. So I got no sleep. I literally got home, took a shower, took my uniform off and put clothes on and went to class. And this professor kind of leaned back, kicked his feet up on the desk and said, if you want to tell a compelling story, write what you know. And I just remember thinking, you want a story? I'll tell you a story. And went home and was like possessed. It was a 36-page short story. It was never a script. And it was just kind of like me screaming into the void, being burnt out. And like, here's this problem. And this is funny. And it was very dark. It was very twisted. It's very different than the movie that everybody saw. But I turned it in. I got an A on it. And that was it. It was a homework. I sent it to my family as a laugh. I said, here's what my job is like. And it was just this kind of darkly funny story that I sent to my parents and my brother. And that was it. I graduated and went to college or finished grad school. And I had gotten a job in California, my first job out of grad school. And my brother is a VFX producer. He puts CGI stuff in film and commercials. And I was visiting him. I had, like I said, a month between when I moved out there and was just enjoying Southern California, LA. And he goes, you need to do something with your life. Write a script. I said, I don't know anything about writing a script. What do you want me to do? He said, well, you got that short story from college. Just turn that into a script. I don't know how to do that. And he said, well, here's the software, just do it. And so I did. Over the week, I wrote the first draft of Code 3. The original title was what I called the short story is Fake Stories from a Real Ambulance Driver. And so I loved that title, but it didn't work. And that was it. I wrote the first draft. I rewrote it a couple times. I had no idea what I was doing. And was like, I basically turned it into my brother. Like, here you go. And the fortunate thing is that Chris Leone, who's the director of the film, and my brother at that time were coworkers. So they both worked at a VFX house. And so my brother strikes up a conversation with Chris and says, hey, Chris, do you want to read a script? To which Chris says, absolutely not, which is the right answer. And he says, well, what's it about? And he says, oh, it's about being a paramedic. Well, what's your brother know about that? And he's like, well, he has been one for 10 years. So ultimately, the shorter version is that Chris finally decided to read the first draft of the script. And the first script was trash. I'm not defending it. It wasn't great, but it was good enough to get his attention. And he said, well, let's have lunch. I'd like to meet him. And so we went and had lunch. And one of the questions Chris asked me the first time I met him was, tell me something that as an outsider, I would have no idea about. He never asked me what the worst thing was I ever saw, but he was just like, tell me something that from a complete outside that I would have no idea. And I just started laughing. And I just said, well, Chris, I know what brains smell like. And he almost fell out of his chair. And he was just like, that's fascinating. And I want to be involved. And so it was just a passion project between the three of us. Nobody got paid. This was not like, no studio was like, we can't wait to make this movie. It was literally us every couple of weeks emailing back and forth. Hey, what do you think about this scene? Or, not touching it for a month. Oh, I had this idea. And so anybody who tells you they did it fast in Hollywood is lying to you, depending on when you measure from. If you measure from when I wrote the short story to when we started shooting, it was 15 years. If you measure from when Chris got involved, it was 12 years. So like nobody got paid until we started turning the cameras on. But that's literally how it started. It was a homework assignment that turned into a script because my brother pushed me to do it. And then he got Chris to read it. And fortunately, it was good enough to get his attention. I tell everybody, like, I was always good at writing. I'd written stuff for EMS World and the Joint Commission and some other publications. So this isn't like, oh, thank God they found me. Like I knew I was a good writer, but to get the validation enough for someone who's in entertainment to pay attention to it and get hooked on the story, the central themes of the story was really meaningful.
What was it that took 12 years? And there's a reason why I asked that aside, which is I've written 2 books now. And the second one, I've started the process of getting it into ultimately becoming a streaming series. And
Chris and I, and was just, really like it. But then comes the feedback. Like Rain is not only an incredibly talented actor, but he's also a producer and a writer. And, he's like, I have some thoughts. What if we tweak this and did that? So that took about 6 months. And then once Rain was happy with it, and he absolutely said, like, I want to play Randy. Like, this is my guy. He had connections to Wayfair, which was the studio that got involved, which got us financing and the rest of the way. So the inefficiencies are kind of the opaque parts of the market. You don't know what people want, right? Like The Pit caught fire, but nobody was asking for a medical drama show. So you are throwing darts at a wall, and ultimately there are gatekeepers there. And if you want to write, I don't know, like if you look back in the past 3 or 4 years, if it wasn't horror, the chance of getting greenlit wasn't much. If it's adult animation, probably not going to get that done. But those tastes change. And then you have things like The Pit. I'll throw Code 3 in there, where people didn't know that's what they wanted, and then they start watching it. So it's the inefficiencies are the people that are trying to appease the algorithm now, and consolidation is always a bad thing. So no matter who buys Warner Brothers, it's bad for the market. because ultimately what used to be entertainment companies are becoming tech companies, and it's about what does the algorithm want versus what do humans want. And that is something that bothers me, but it's also the reality of where we are.
That's really interesting. And it doesn't help me at all because it's a very human story. So I'm screwed then. With the fusion of the comedy and the burnout story, was that something that you had initially in the script, or was that something that Rain brought to the conversation?
No, it was always it was in the first draft. That kind of, in fact, Chris, if you listen to any of his interviews, he'll tell you the first time he read it, he loved the idea that we were telling a story through comedy, and I think he came up with the phrase like the best way to tell the truth is through humor, and that was always one of the central things. Even in the first draft of the script was, even when I was writing it, the short story, and that like it was never, come worship me because I'm a hero. It was, look at this goofy stuff that happens in the name of healthcare, or this is stupid and I don't like it and I'm going to yell about it, kind of thing. It was really, like I said, me screaming into the void, but having some punchy lines and some funniness in there. So that was always part of its organic DNA. Now, Rain and Rel and Amy and Rob and Yvette, like you couldn't have asked for better people to take that to the next level. But it was always central to the theme of the film was we wanted to tell something funny, but we also wanted it to hit hard. And so we never shied away from the darker aspects of the job because that went hand in glove with the honest portrayal of the job. And I have said, like, I had the opportunity to go talk to the National Registry, the board of the National Registry. And one of the goals of this film really was to be a recruitment tool. And I know that sounds silly or braggadocious, depending on your perspective, is that we wanted to tell such an honest story that if you were curious about what this job is, hopefully this movie shows you that. So if you are naively thinking that you're going to put a cape on and just go save the world, you'll self-select out before you devote too much time into this career. And the flip side of that too is like, if you got into it for the right reasons, you could see a mirror of it and say like, you're not alone. And so the goal was always to bring more people into the field by being honest, because if you watch any TV show or movie about us, it's always like they're either doofuses, they're the people that declare people dead, or they're just a bunch of guys, thinking between their legs trying to get the next thing. And we didn't want to do any of that. We wanted to be true to the job and pay homage to what I think is arguably one of the noblest professions out there.
Yeah, you did a great job. I mean, one of the scenes, I don't want to obviously talk too much about it because I want people to watch it, but there is that, I think it's one of the fourth wall moments where he's talking to the camera, I think, but he's talking about the decapitated 2-year-old. And I've literally had a decapitated 2-year-old in a traffic accident. And it just was like a punch to the face when he started talking about that. But you've got all the shenanigans and the laughter and the burnout and the tantrums and everything else, and all of a sudden it just grabs you for a moment. It's like, but let me tell you about what we actually go through. And again, it's not everything. Like you said, 1 minute you're doing a rolled ankle, and I've had a guy that didn't like his dentures and called 911, and we had to take a ride along because he was combative as well. So you have those, but then you have these horrific calls as well, and they do add up. So I thought you did a really good job of using comedy to kind of pull the story along, but not afraid every so often to slam on the brakes and just kind of hold a scene, a much more kind of raw scene in front of us before then it carries on again.
One of the best comments that I've received that I really like, or when I see the reviews or some people have found me on like Instagram and stuff like that, not that I'm hard to find, but are the ones that go, basically some version of, thank you for this because now I could show my family what my job is like without me having to tell the story every single day. Or the ones that are like, I feel seen, or, those are the kind of ones that I care about personally, that we got it right. Like, yeah, don't get me wrong. I love appreciation and praise as much as the next guy. But the ones where they're like, I'm now sharing this with my significant other, my of age children. This is not a kid's movie. Let me be clear. But like, I could show this to my family and it helps us have the conversation. And to me, like, that's like, I wish this movie existed when I was working full time, so that way I could share it for that same reason. So for me, those are the ones that matter the most. And then of course the ones that are like, you got it right, that we're not cartoons and we're not superheroes, like that kind of stuff really matters.
What about the doctor? The way you portray the ER physician. I've had some phenomenal ER physicians throughout my career, like really, really great people that were the complete polar opposite of that. But we all kind of know a version of that character too. What made you make that be the primary person every single time they went to the ER?
So let me be clear. Dr. Serrano is not a real person. He is a culmination of exactly what you said, that guy or girl, right? We've all ran into him. He is a cartoon. He is absolutely cartoon, but versions of him exist everywhere. And like you said, some of my closest friends are still our docs that I worked with. They're, I still have their phone number. Like, they're great people. Most doctors are. This is not a slight against doctors or cops or anybody else. But we had to tell a compelling story. And to make it really hit, we needed a foil that could stand up to Rainn Wilson. Like, we needed somebody that could basically beat up Rainn. And so we get Rob Riggle, who is delightful, amazing human. He's so nice. He's so great to work with. But we had to have somebody there that would kind of punch back, and we needed that. So this isn't ER docs are bad. It was just we needed somebody that could stand up to Rainn. And those interactions that are being had, some are in jest, some are in frustration. And the reason we have that, there's a scene that humanizes him. Like I said, we're not going to spoil it, but there's a scene where he talks about the stressors that he's under working in the emergency room. And so what you come to realize is, like, these two people really hate each other, but they hate each other for the exact same reason. Like, it's not them, it's the systems that they're working under. And I think
he's burnt out too, basically.
Yeah, he's burnt out too. But I think if you really look at it, they really respect each other, because what happens when they later on in the film, when they really get heated, there's a mutual respect to do the right thing, but they're coming at it from different angles.
Absolutely. Well, one more area, and then we'll go to some closing questions. I won't go too deeply because, again, I don't want to give away, the kind of latter part of the story, but a truth that's come out of so many transition stories in, military and first responders is we were, called to this profession to make the world a little bit better. There's more to it than that, but, there is a service element to it. And where I see people really struggle when they transition out is if they find themselves in some sort of other profession where there isn't that service. Maybe it is purely money focused or sales focused, for example. And so, without taking a deep dive into that, I thought that was a really good part of the story too. Understanding that even if you're burnt out, and even if ultimately you transition to another version of something, if you're not serving, it's going to be incredibly jarring. So we can't just, flawlessly transition into, the Wall Street and now just chase money and want Rolexes and Ferraris and think that's going to be, the perfect bridge for a first responder or a military member. Who we are really does dictate whether we stay in a profession the full 20, 25 years, and or whatever comes next still has an element of serving woven into it.
I agree. I was very fortunate that as I was transitioning out of clinical medicine, I got to do something that I felt was a service. Again, my role was very niched. I got to work inpatient experience for the better part of a dozen years. And to me, what I would always say is, when I was in the ambulance, I got to make a decision that made a huge difference in one person, maybe 2, 3 at the absolute worst, people's lives at one time. Now pull back, and I'm working in this in the hospital system where the decisions I make impact thousands of lives, because I'm working on systematic projects that impact people to make sure that they understand the care that they're getting, that they feel seen and heard, et cetera. So my transition was very easy. There was a very easy lane for me to fit into. Now, I got very, very lucky. But to your point, yeah, I think it would be really hard for somebody to go from paramedic to car salesman. Because I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I've surveyed a few first responders, and to a point, they all say some version of, I got into this role to help. That's why I got into it. We want to help people. That's why we got into it. And then the systematic issues start to build, and you get into that moral hazard, the moral injury territory, where I know what I need to do. I know what I want to do. And not because I can't, because I'm unable to provide that. And I think that's really challenging. We really did we watched The Hurt Locker, and we frankly stole a lot from The Hurt Locker. We really like that movie. But there's a scene in The Hurt Locker when he rotates back stateside, and he's just in the grocery store, and it's sterile white, and he's just like more terrifying than trying to defuse a bomb in Afghanistan. Like, that's kind of the same thing. Now, again, I'll say this again. I've never served in the military. I don't claim to. Respect to all the people that do. But to me, I would imagine that it's something similar to that.
Absolutely. Well, I want to throw some closing questions at you before I let you go. The first one I love to ask, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
1,000 Naked Strangers by Kevin Hazard. Love that book. I've just recently, I haven't met him in person, but after the movie came out, he reached out to me and we got a chance to chat for a little bit. But I read that book, God, I think the year it came out. And he got it right. So if you haven't read 1,000 Naked Strangers, you need to. Great EMS book. In fact, as I was writing my story, I was just like, well, he already did it. Like, I'm done. What do I need to do? But fantastic book. For anybody who's interested in the patient experience kind of journey stuff, Hardwiring Excellence by Quint Studer. That was the book that got me into the field that I was in. Great book. Geez, putting me on the spot. I grew up, my dad was a huge advocate of how to win friends and influence people. And I think that's still to this day a great book to read and take a hold of. I'm blanking. You put me on the spot here. I wasn't prepared for that question, but
no, that's definitely you've already said though. They're all great books. Yeah, I had Kevin on a while ago now. He wrote American Sirens as well, about the original paramedics out of Pittsburgh in the Freedom House back in the 60s, but they were all African American. So that story kind of got rewritten a little bit, whitewashed, I think is the term. Yeah. And, we all thought that the original EMS was in Miami and LA in the, the 70s, but it predates that. So fascinating.
The Pit does a great job paying homage to them too.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. All right. Well, we'll talk about your film in a minute, but what about other films, television shows, and documentaries that you love?
Oh, man. I feel like you have to say the cliche things, Mother Jugs and Speed, Bringing Out the Dead. They were good. They were arguably not my favorite, and I'm sure I'll get yelled at in the comments for that, but I think they were the first real attempts to kind of explain our world. And of course, The Godfather is amazing. The Hurt Locker, again, was a huge inspiration for our film. If you haven't seen it, you need to go see it. Just know that I unfortunately am blanking on the filmmakers' names, but they were fabulous in that film. As far as comedies go, I grew up watching Mel Brooks. I think he's spectacular at everything that he touches. Rob Reiner, The Princess Diaries. Unfortunately, rest in peace. That was a horrific murder that just came out the other day. But really, the things that we were a big comedy house at growing up, and so we would watch, like I said, Mel Brooks, John Cleese, all of that kind of stuff, and those were always things that really, really impacted me. One of my favorite movies ever. There's two movies that I love that I will get in fights defending, even though they don't deserve it. The first one is. There's a movie called Undercover Blues. It's, I think, an early 90s movie, Dennis Quaid. And the reason I love that movie is that Stanley Tucci plays this hitman. And it's the movie is wacky, but Stanley Tucci's character to me makes the whole film, because the central concept is like these are two CIA agents trying to do something. And Stanley Tucci plays this hitman whose name is Muerte, and they keep calling him Morty. And it's just like this comedic foil that's like perfectly timed. Every time he comes in, they beat him up, and they just always keep calling him like, Morty, I don't have time for this. And they go beat him up, and he goes away, and he comes back around later in the movie. The reason I say I love that movie is, even as a kid, my brother, my dad, and I were all big movie fans, and we would always be like, movie needs a Morty. And we would always reference that movie. And the other one is arguably one of my favorite movies, called The Hudson Hawk. Very young Bruce Willis. The movie is objectively terrible. It got a raspberry, I think, in the 90s. It deserved the raspberry. The entire plot makes no sense. And I love this film for one reason only. Two reasons. There is the banter between Bruce Willis and his partner throughout the entire film, I think is just absolutely chef's kiss, perfect. And then if you watch that movie and all you care about is, does Bruce Willis get a cup of coffee? Cinematic masterpiece. Nothing else makes sense. The movie's awful, but it's one of my absolute favorites. And I highly recommend both of those to anybody, because I think if I was a film student, those would be my keystone movies that I'd make everybody watch. So those two things, and even in the film in Code 3, like, the film needs a Morty. We have, different characters that kind of play that. The banter between Mike and Randy, ultimately, at least from I can't speak for Chris, but for came from that Hudson Hawk banter between Bruce Willis and his character and his partner. So I love those films. I'm trying to think. What were the other questions you asked me? You asked me about films and what?
Yeah, it's okay. Films, documentaries, television. So there's any of the screen stuff, basically.
Yeah, there was a show called Third Watch that I thought did a really good job of showing public safety that I enjoyed watching. So that was good. Documentary wise, I'm a huge science nerd, and my wife makes fun of me because I love like how the universe works and thinking about like everything from particle physics to black holes, but none of that has any bearing on this. It's just something that I find fascinating that I could never do the math on. But anything to do with that kind of stuff fascinates me. So I always love those types of things where you could tie in like deep unknown truths about the universe and trying to make them human in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'm derailing your podcast or not, but you asked me.
No.
Those are my answers.
No, that's great. I love the way that, the reasons behind some of the films. It's funny you talk about the coffee. I guarantee you that that probably was an inspiration for The Fall Guy, because if you notice, Ryan Gosling through the whole film is trying to get a cup of coffee, and then there's all these fight scenes that happen. So probably inspired by that.
Totally reminds me. One of the whole themes of Code 3, but I mean, way before like this version got scrapped, but the whole thing was Rain didn't eat, Rain wasn't even attached yet. One of the running gags was every time the ambulance was going to pull in to get a meal, they get a call. And so it was just like, once we decided it was a 24-hour shift, we're like, we have to feed him. Like, but the earlier versions of the script was literally like he's just hangry the entire time from breakfast on. And it was one of my things I was always big on, was like, he doesn't get to eat through the entire movie. And then obviously once you make it a 24-hour shift, he has to eat. So
yeah, but it was good. Even when he does, that scene works 100%. Have you seen Asphalt City? Sean Penn plays a paramedic.
No, I have not. I've heard about it though.
Okay, so they did a good job, but they made it so dark that I would argue it was the opposite of a recruitment tool. I won't say any more than that. Absolutely,
is that the one where he's NYPD, or was it called Black Flies? I know he did one. Or
no, he plays a paramedic. He's but FDNY paramedic, if I remember rightly. So he's a New York paramedic.
I've heard about that one.
I did very dark, very dark. So I think darkness is great, but I think if you have darkness, that gives you the opportunity to really then show the light, and vice versa. But if it's just all dark, yeah, you could be dark and it turns into bleakness if you're not careful. Yeah, exactly. I would argue that probably does. All right. Well, then the next question, is there a person you'd recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
Oh, wow. I mean, so I've had the good fortune to meet a lot of people that are in this field. Rob Lawrence, who's the executive director of the California Ambulance Association. I've known Rob for years. In fact, we were podcasting before podcasting was cool in the early 2010s with Chris Cebollero and him talking about EMS leadership. Chris Holden, who's a dear friend of mine, he owns and operates First Priority Medical Transport or mobile healthcare in South Carolina. He was the roommate I was talking about earlier that we would go to the gym together. He's a growing voice. Henry Lewis, who's the head of the South Carolina EMS Association. Bill Seifert from the National Registry. His story is fascinating. Justin Rapoff, Dr. Justin Rapoff, a childhood friend of mine. Literally, I've known him since 7 or 8 years old. He's one of the EMS heads for St. Louis EMS. St. Louis, Missouri. Man. But yeah, those people are Chris Cebollero. I think I mentioned his name. He's really good too. He's a leadership consultant now. Rob Riggle would absolutely be fabulous because he's a former Marine officer. Would be absolutely delight. He has his own podcast called Riggle's Picks, which is a great podcast. You should listen to that too. Rain, obviously, Amy, Yvette, anybody. Those are the people. Lil Rel, he great. Those people are all fundamentally great human beings. Like I know that they're celebrities, but they're fabulous people. Highly recommend. Chris Leone, certainly. If you wanted to learn more about the film and his backstory. Who else? Yeah, those are the ones that come to mind right off the top of my head. But yeah, and you couldn't go wrong with any of them. They're all great people. They're all passionate people that care a lot about what they do and making the world better, which to me are the people that I'm very attracted to.
Yeah, that's literally fundamentally how I'm bringing people together for my project. There's $0 attached to it at the moment. So it's showing people this is the idea with the story, and there's an accompanying element to it as well. The goal is to, literally try and bring some healing back into the world. And, if that resonates with people, okay, and then we can start building everything around it. But just like you got to have good humans around you in that kind of project. If you're just going to make some mindless action movie and put some, superstar in the front and not really worry about the script and just slap it on Netflix, then good for you. But I mean, when I ask the questions about films that really resonate with people, the number of times I hear, Band of Brothers and, Shawshank Redemption and some of these really powerful human stories that actually are impacting people. So yeah, that's the kind of human I want to surround myself, even with this, not only the show, but more importantly, the podcast too. It doesn't matter if you're a Hollywood star, or you're my best friend or something, you know what I mean? It's the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And the nice thing is there's no shortage of really good people. They're just not typically celebrities. Like most of them are like, and again, I hate to bring this back to my mom, but like she wasn't a celebrity, but man, the people that came out of the woodwork when they found out she was no longer with us that's when you see the impact. And hopefully I hope people get recognized while they're still with us and not after they're in a coffin. Because there's a lot of people doing a lot of great work that don't get the accolades that they need or that they deserve publicly.
Yeah. Well, I think that's how we turn things around. When the spotlight, even though they wouldn't want it on them, is put on the people that are healing, that are bringing people together, that's when we turn it around. As we've seen, sadly, more recently, if the microphones and the spotlights are putting on the people that are even just self-serving or divisive, then you end up with this kind of increased stress and lack of community. So it's the good humans, whatever their backgrounds are, that we need more now than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I'm trying to think you said it perfectly. I'm going to just stop talking. Feel free to edit that out. I'm sitting here like, there's a lot of great people out there.
All right, well, let's go back. So before we talk about the where people can find the film, one last question. What do you do to decompress?
For me, I love to cook. So I'm really good at it. I enjoy it. To me, it's kind of no matter what happens, when I get into the kitchen and I start figuring out what I'm doing and planning a meal and making something, and you start working at it and the smells come out and everything, that to me really helps center me, because it's one of those things where you have to be present or else you'll screw it up. And especially if you want to do something extra special or you want to make it not Kraft mac and cheese, not that I'm knocking it, it's delicious, but that to me is something I really like, artistic things. So I like to do ceramics, and I've just recently started dabbling in woodworking. And so anything that gets me out of the head of, quote, work and being able to express myself some artistic fashion. I obviously like to write. I still do. I write poetry and stuff that no one will ever see, but it's a nice little outlet. And then I've been fortunate enough to have the privilege to travel. And I still think that's one of the best things that anybody can do, and that I've had the opportunity, the fortune enough to be able to do, to be able to, just say, let's let's take a weekend trip, and my wife and I'll go and go visit someplace and spend a few days just decompressing away from both of our respective work things that we have to focus on. And to me, that's really important. And spending time with the people that you really like. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I have a fantastic wife. I love her. She's fabulous. And she's one of my favorite humans. So I love spending time with her. So I'm very, very lucky in that, when I put stuff on the shelf, I can come home and be home and spend time with people that I really like. And I have a corgi too, and he's adorable. So, that makes life easy.
Just going back, because I meant to ask you and I didn't. You talked about the burnout that you had while you were still working EMS. What were the tools that helped you get out of that state?
Therapy, full stop. Friends are great, and I had a lot of friends. Most of my friends were cops, firefighters, and medics, and we were all kind of mirrors of each other. So it didn't really help when you were just complaining and it just keeps stacking. But I tell everybody what I got to give the commencement speech at a recent paramedic graduation, and what I told all of them was the same advice, I gave to the Colorado EMS Association, was that you need to take the vacations when you get the time. Like, when you've earned your time, it's not a fallacy to take a vacation. You fundamentally need to be able to step away from this job and recenter yourself, which means like it can't be like a day off. You need purposeful vacations that they cannot call you, they cannot get in touch with you, preferably out of where you work, like your area, your geographic area of you work. You need to take your time because this job will take it from you. You need to make friends with normies, people who are not in this industry, because they will be a great mirror for you for when you start to change and you can't see it. Make sure you make friends with like engineers, school teachers, whatever. Anybody who's not at all associated with fire, EMS, dispatch, or police. And then the other one too is get help. And I mean that sincerely. I was very burnt out. I didn't realize how burnt out I was. And the therapy is not weakness. And I think that if there's anything that's going to be on my tombstone, I think that's it. And like, I went to therapy regularly for the better part of 2.5 years. And again, I was very, very lucky. No drugs, I didn't want to kill myself. But becoming what I would consider fully human again was a path forward, was work. It takes work. It sucks. It's hard. But you put in the work if you have a good therapist. And that doesn't mean that the first one you get works for you. I went through like 2 or 3 of them before I found the one that was the right fit for me. What I advocate for with people all the time is, let's say you're healthy now, and I hope you are, do the pre-work now. Go vet the therapist, go vet the people, like do a check-in, just make sure they take your insurance, do all of the crap right now. So that way tomorrow when you need that help, you've got all of that stuff laid out. Because what I've heard from lots of industry professionals is like, we have an EAP, a robust employee assistance program, is what I always hear. And I say, great, have you vetted it? And what I mean by that is exactly what I told you. The most that I see, you get 6 free sessions. Usually they're with a coach, they're not with a therapist. And as soon as you're done with those 6, like, good luck, you're on your own. So I think EAP programs are fantastic, and we should continue to invest in them. Giant asterisks. You're going to need somebody to continue that work forward. And to do that, you got to do a little bit of pre-work. And this isn't like you're all broken, you poor souls. But like, if you do the work now, trust me, when you need it later, it will be a much easier process.
I've lost count how many EAP horror stories I've heard. And there, as you said, there are people that use that blueprint, vet their therapists and have a really great system. Some even have unlimited sessions available. So I'm excluding them. But the number of times that I've heard someone go to an EAP listed practitioner, if they even answered the phone or if their number was even in service, and they sat in front of the person who wasn't culturally competent, and that person burst into tears, or that person told them they get out, they can't help them. I've lost count how many times I've heard that. And I always say this, what really breaks my heart is I heard those because those people are still alive. How many have we lost because of a broken EAP system where they finally had the courage to ask for help? They sat in front of the wrong person. They said they couldn't help them. They went home, they stuck a gun in their mouth. So vetting from the personal point of view, I think that's such great advice, especially if you are not in a bad place. Now is the perfect time because you've got a clear mind. But if you are the employer as well, making sure that those names on that list are still there, are answering the phone, don't have a 6-month waiting list, and then most importantly, have ever even worked with the population that you serve.
Yeah, I will echo that immediately. Yeah. If you are a leader in any of the public service agencies, tomorrow, when you go to work, call your EAP and find out like exactly what you said. Cause I went through that the first, you get the list of people and the first one's dead. The second one's in a different state. The third one isn't seeing new clients. The fourth one doesn't take your insurance. Like if you are a leader in any service right now, tomorrow, call your EAP and find out and whittle that list down, because yes, your industry or your organization probably did invest with the best of intentions on an EAP program. But that EAP program, speaking from experience and from, like you said, the horror stories I've heard, may not be up to date. I hope it is. And I hope you have a great one. But it is your job as a leader to make sure that your people, when they reach for help, can get that help. And don't settle for the list. Like you as the leader, call through that list and make sure that it's accurate and up to date.
Absolutely. All right. Well, then for people listening, firstly, where can they find the film?
We are on Apple and Amazon right now to rent or buy. And Amazon, you can buy a physical DVD copy on Amazon right now. I know that they are working on a streaming deal, but none of that is finalized. So I don't even know if that's going to happen yet. As the writer, unfortunately, I'm not part of those conversations. So basically I'll get an email someday if it happens that says, hey, we've got a deal. But right now, the only way you can watch it is rent or purchase on Apple or Amazon digitally, or you can actually buy the DVD on Amazon right now.
Beautiful. And then what about you? If people want to reach out to you, learn more about you, where are the best places online?
Well, if you can spell my name correctly, I'm very easy to find on Instagram and Facebook. It's just Patrick Pianezza on those various platforms. But that's where I live. Those are the only handles that I have right now.
Beautiful. Well, I want to thank you so much. It's been such an amazing conversation. Of course, it was the film that ultimately connected us, but your perspective on everything from the volunteer and EMS through to the other side of healthcare. And one of the first people, honestly, that's been in that space that's talked about universal healthcare as well. It's been such an amazing conversation. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thanks for having us. And I end all of my interviews with this right now. For anybody who's doing the job, I don't care where you are or what it is that you do. Thank you for what you do, because I know you'll never hear it enough. So you're going to hear it from me today. Thank you for what you do. It matters. You are very important, and what you're doing is saving lives. So I appreciate it. And that's coming from somebody who did the job for 12 years. So keep up the good work. Do what you can.